Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Caroline Colas, and I'm the Senior Director of Health and Wellness for the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. And I am so glad you're here today. I'm your host for the Online Positive Psychology Hour. This is a series that we've been doing throughout the pandemic with the Whole Being Institute. Today, we're going to be talking about Lost and Found, a compass for your heroine's journey or your hero's journey with Alice Dommert. Excuse me. As an architect, Alice designs buildings and exhibits around the world for zoos and botanic gardens. She understood how to create spaces and experiences, and it appeared that life too could be designed. Yet she discovered that life cycles cannot conform to the narrow banks of expectation. Like her favorite heroine from Alice in Wonderland, she lost her muchness. So today we're going to discover how a 30-day challenge in a small wood near her home unfolded and how positive psychology practices framed her journey and how they can become a compass and compass points to guide us on our own heroine or hero's journey. A little bit about Alice. She is a whole being architect and the founder of CEO Prasada, a collective of health, leadership, and whole being professionals. As a licensed architect and exhibit designer, writer, speaker, and consultant with training in yoga, mindfulness, and breathwork, she is a certified level 1 CrossFit trainer. Now that's really a whole being, a whole dimensional human. Alice, I can't wait to hear more about all of these things that you do. She holds a certificate in positive psychology from Whole Being Institute and trained in leadership development with the Preeminent Growth Collaborative. She is committed to continually learning, testing, and living whole being practices of mind and body. Alice, welcome, welcome, welcome to the call. I'm going to put you on the spotlight. Thank you so much for being here.
Sure. Thank you so much, Caroline, for having me.
Yeah, and I just think it's amazing your commitment to the whole being. And, can you tell me more about that? And did you have that before SIP and the Whole Being Institute, or was that something that you incorporated? Tell me a little bit about your journey.
I was that weird little kid that in second grade said, I'm going to be an architect. And I was also that kid that couldn't sit still. So I think from the very beginning, I had a body that wasn't necessarily always cooperating and focused, and I had a mind that was always curious. So I had to early on figure out which techniques I had to use. I remember doing aerobics, Jane Fonda with the striped leotard. I was right there in the, before we were back at home doing workouts, I was doing things with Jane Fonda. So really that need, that desire and that sort of requirement of both of those things was something that happened early on.
Wow. And how did you come across the Whole Being Institute and the SIP program?
So I had been going to Kripalu as I started to practice yoga in my architecture practice. My business partner was also my husband. I had 2 young children, and I had to learn a lot of the practices, mindfulness and some other practices, just so that no one would get hurt. And so I was very familiar with Kripalu. And then when I got the information about the Whole Being Institute, I had learned a lot of things in yoga and mindfulness, but I had launched a company in the industry of corporate wellness. And in corporate wellness, the big fear is that you're going to go and present something and they're going to say that you're woo-woo. That is the big worry. So I had learned a lot of things in yoga and mindfulness, and I was on my own translating the language so that I could go and present to doctors and attorneys. And so when I saw the Whole Being Institute and I saw this field of positive psychology and I saw all the research and they were hosting the program at Kripalu, it was just everything really aligned. And I appreciated that they were grounding it in a place that had body practices and had that integration. So that was really how I landed there.
That's awesome. And it's really true, this idea of living aspire, right? That what we talk as aspire, spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, emotional, incorporating all the aspects of who we are as humans into our life is like architecture. It's like a good design. It's a good structure. So you have a favorite heroine Alice in Wonderland. And
I,
I'm just
I
so excited to share what you're doing today because it's so magical and practical at the same time. So let's get started.
okay, thank you. So let me share my screen here. Let's see. Looks like, so here we are, Lost and Found. So I was invited to contribute a chapter. One of the women who was in the Whole Being Institute's certificate in positive psychology, she put out a call in January and said, who would like to write a chapter? And so a lot of today's presentation is really based on what I did with that chapter. So the idea here is lost and found in our whole sort of hero and heroine's journey, and this idea of a compass. So we're going to look at this idea of stories. We're going to look at this idea of heroes and heroines. And we're going to look at this idea of strengths. And we're really going to wonder. So I'm always reading fiction because in fiction, I like the fact that I get to fill in with my imagination. And so through these three elements, I really see these as coming together and really contributing to this idea of being a compass. And a compass for when we're just on a nice walk and want to make our way to the coffee shop, or when we're really in those really hard times where we really do feel lost. So to start off with, if you have something to write with and a piece of paper, I want to ask and have you write down, what is your favorite story? So it could be a movie, or it could be a book. Most of us, it might be a story that you've had for a long time. It might be, maybe it's a recent story, but a story. And then think about stories are based on people. So in that story, who is the character, the hero, the heroine from that story that is your favorite? And really imagine that person. Think about how they look, the kinds of things that they do. And then, why do you like them? What is it about them that appeals to you? Maybe write down a few qualities that they possess that you like. So in the field of positive psychology, one of the foundations is something that are called character strengths. Now, when you look and think about your character, you look at what you wrote down, maybe some of these might be some of the qualities of your favorite character. Or maybe you see these qualities and you go, oh yeah, she has that or he has that. So the character strengths were developed as a foundation of positive psychology. They really came out of this question. Christopher Peterson and Martin Seligman, who were leaders in the positive psychology field, really had this question about, what are the strengths and virtues that allow people to flourish and have a meaningful life? And they looked across history and they looked across time, cultures, and they came up with this list of these 24 character strengths. These were really about, that idea of flourishing in your life, living this best life. And so a lot of times whenever we talk about strengths, when we do programs, we do a lot of programs for people in the corporate environment as wellness programs. And I like to describe character strengths as three things that they really bring. They're your superpowers. So if you've never taken the VIA character strength test, you will get a list. You will get a list of the top 5. Those are your signature strengths, but these are your superpowers that you already possess. And so if you think about your story, a lot of times in a story, it's the hero's journey story. The character already possesses those characters, but the journey is where they discover them. We also look at character strengths as a path to flourishing. They find that when people know and understand their strengths, they really flourish, and they can cultivate them both in themselves and in others. And the third thing that we like to say about character strengths is it's a new language. We do a lot of programs with teachers, and when we talk about children, and a lot of times we're good jobbing them, good job, nice work. But when we know this new language of character strengths, we actually have a lot more ways to pinpoint what it is that we are noticing. It also helps us build relationships. And there's some great resources about how to have a strength spotting date with your partner. But it really gives us a new language, a new positive language, because we've got that focus. So often we're finding that default to the negativity. So these are just some of the things. Also, as we flourish, we're building positive emotions. And so when you think about your story, a lot of times that character and those signature strengths are things that when we think about those things, we feel good. We get that little surge of all those chemicals and hormones that go in our body. And the other really critical thing about understanding our strengths, and this certainly happened for me as I went on this path, was that we start to build confidence. One of the things about setting goals, especially goals for our health, and at Persada we say we believe that people have the desire to thrive, and that means to live a life of health, purpose, and joy. Research shows one of the biggest inhibitors is when people are not able to set goals, or they've set a goal and they haven't been able to achieve it. They trace that back to self-confidence. Well, it's easy to say, oh, we'll just build self-confidence for people, but how do we do that? So this discovery of our innate strengths, this discovery of things that we already possess, it's almost like somebody saying, oh, you've got a Ferrari in your driveway already, and now we're just going to teach you how to drive it. So those are two really of the important elements. That's kind of our deep dive into the character strengths. So my hero, Alice in Wonderland. Now, there's the original Alice in Wonderland, but my real version is the 2010 story. It was rewritten by a woman, and Johnny Depp is the Mad Hatter. So I'm going to read a couple of excerpts from the chapter. And so I'll set this up for you to give you a little sense of how this version of Alice in Wonderland is set up. One night on the couch with my two teenagers, we were watching the new version of Alice in Wonderland with Johnny Depp as the Mad Hatter. In this version, 19-year-old Alice, feeling the stifling expectations of the society of 1871 London, receives an unwanted marriage proposal. Her heart sinks. Now, Alice's father has died, so her mother is very concerned about getting her off and married to secure not only Alice's clearly successful future if that happens, but the successful future of the entire family is now resting on her shoulders. Out of the corner of her eye, as she's receiving this marriage proposal, she catches a glimpse of the white rabbit and says a polite "excuse me," and she follows the rabbit down a deep rabbit hole. A disoriented Alice finds her old friends, though no one in Wonderland is sure that she is the right Alice. So let's see if this little video clip's going to work. If you can't hear the sounds, I'll tell you what it says. We're having a little bit of technical trouble.
You're not the same as you were before. You were much more muchier. You've lost your muchness.
My muchness.
In there, something's missing.
So when Alice goes back to Wonderland, things are in disarray. They actually tell her it's not called Wonderland, it's actually called Underland. She still drinks things and shrinks, but at some point they realize that the Red Queen has taken over and things are not good. And so everyone's concerned about this, and Alice is saying, what? And the Mad Hatter says, well, you can't be any help to us. And she says, what do you mean? And he says, you have lost your muchness. So as I was sitting on the couch watching this, I realized that I had lost my muchness. And I think we all come to those moments, not just one moment in life, but where we feel lost. It might be that we feel lost because we have experienced a loss. It might be that we just have planned things and they didn't work out. So the story of the sort of underpinning framework of most of our favorite stories are this idea, the hero's journey. This is taken from the Mystic Monastery, an artist. The person is living the ordinary life, some adventure calls, they cross the threshold into that special world, and they go through all these different ordeals. They meet a mentor, and they kind of come out the other side with victory, and they return to sort of help others. So this idea of how can we move on our own journey, and how did I go looking? I tried to Google it. When you Google lost muchness, you don't really get too many clues. So I'll read a little more from the chapter. As I stood at the precipice of my own heroine's journey, it felt much less glamorous than the way it's described in the stories. Fortunately, I was not alone. I had been infected as I walked along my fellow positive psychology sojourners as we spent a year together at the Holbing Institute's certificate in positive psychology. Their courage had been contagious. We explored our character strengths by using the VIA character strength assessment. It identifies what makes you feel authentic and engaged, the positive parts of your personality and aspects of your character, your innate abilities that you perform with ease. The results of my assessment arrived as a map I did not yet recognize that would guide me on my journey. So I had completed the positive psychology program, and I was at this kind of lost place, and I was deciding to do a new 30-day challenge. I had a new iPhone, I had a little woods by my house, and I decided I was going to take a picture, and this is not, many people have done this. I was going to take a picture, and I was going to post it on social media, something in the woods. Here's what happened. On day 4, I charged out the door, phone in hand, with a looming pressure of an overpacked schedule for the day. I calculated I could be in the woods within a few minutes, snap a photo, and edit it and post it as I walked back. Then I saw her, a tiny masterpiece. She looked like an artist's sketch. I dropped down flat on the ground to meet this tiny mushroom, eye to eye. The smell of the mulch under her wrapped around me. I knew her kind. She had a lifespan of only a few fleeting hours. As I took the photos, the details of her underside gills, tinted with black ink, came into focus. My curiosity grew. Time slipped away. Something within me lit up and flickered like a sparkler. Curiosity was the first quiver of my muchness that woke up in me that morning. I recognized that feeling of excitement from playing as a young child, enveloped in a green room of the branches of a weeping willow at my grandparents' farm. It was a brightness of being fully in my senses and bolstered by the desire to explore the next discovery and delight. As a child, I was bold, wondering about why and how it all worked. I love looking closer and following vibrant, bright colors and patterns to understand what was within. The days ticked off on the calendar. On some walks, I'd focus on the tiniest of things. I'd want to get low, to zoom in, look at all the details. On other days, my eyes would shift. My perspective would broaden, and I'd take in the forest and the trees. With each day I spent in the woods among the trees, my curiosity flamed into a steady fire. My serious, overpacked adult life had squelched my curiosity over the years. In my woods, over time, looking closely, my curiosity came back to life. So curiosity was one of my top strengths. So let's take a breath. When you think about your character and you identified their top strengths, are any of those strengths your top strengths? And maybe think about a time when you used one of those strengths and had a moment when you saw eye to eye with a mushroom or had some experience like that.
Beautiful, Alice. Can we actually have you share and unshare your screen, because we have a little writing on the screen from
Sure.
some folks that had to get on, and then just pop back on. Pop it back up. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you.
So this idea, I won't go through all the strengths that I discovered in the woods, but I really, my curiosity, my love of nature, this idea that I could be in the woods, I could really observe nature. I really started, and it was almost as if this map of my strengths unfolded as I spent more time in the woods just by following the first one. And so if you haven't taken the time and done the assessment for the VIA character strengths, it's just a really, really fun exercise to do. Let's keep going here.
I put a link into the chat for everyone to take the free VIA strength survey.
Okay, awesome, awesome. So I want to share with you one of my other strengths. So my other strengths was one of my other strengths was love. Now I am a firstborn. I became an architect in second grade. I said I was going to be an architect. I was a very, very, very driven person, a very type A personality. And so when I first saw love as one of my top strengths, I was a little baffled by it. And yet in the woods, I discovered something different. 30 days turned into 60 days, and then stretched into 120 days, and then 150 days. The daily walks were no longer a to-do on my task list. I slowed down. Each day, I anticipated that moment when my breath would catch as I spotted the beauty. The time in the woods shifted from producing an image to a practice of gratitude. I would pause and bow to the people who had left this little patch of green, to this daily practice, to the pines, the maples, the dogwoods, and the katsura. In walking slowly, getting to know, receiving what nature offered, and bowing often, as Mary Oliver reminds us, I fell in love. Another strength surfaced. The VIA defines love as the ability to invest in a reciprocal loving and the capacity to receive love from others in a romantic friend and companion, or as a compassionate patron or a parent-child relationship. The love I found was a love of nature, a love of life, and it too was reciprocal. As our familiarity with each other grew, I would cross a threshold of pavement that turned to soil in the woods, and it was as if nature was waiting for me. Eckhart Tolle has a very small book that's called Stillness, and I found that he and Mary Oliver and many of the poets really gave me the words to understand what I was experiencing. And in his book, he says, nature can bring you to stillness. This is a gift to you. When you perceive and join with nature in the field of stillness, that field becomes permeated in your awareness. That is your gift to nature. Through you, nature becomes aware of itself. Nature has been waiting for you, as it were, for millions of years. Millions of years? When I sat at my beloved Katsura tree, I could feel this deep stillness, this deep peace, a deep and life-giving feeling of love. That feeling spread over me like the wandering honeysuckle vines that I watched grow in the early summer months of my walks. I could say yes to this gift. I could be in love with nature and with life. And when I felt this love for nature, I felt happier. I responded with more ease, less struggle, and more peace. So I'm going to pop back over. So when you look at these character strengths, maybe there's one that you're curious about, might be one that is so far away from your normal list. But this idea, whenever I explored something that really didn't seem like it was an innate thing for me, is part of the practice of character strengths. I'll have a sheet that I send to these guys, and it will get passed on to you all. And there's one great list of all these different ideas about what you might want to explore if you were trying to cultivate a character strength. One of my other top ones is appreciation of beauty and excellence. And that made sense to me. I'm an architect. I like beautiful things. I like colors. But during the pandemic, one of the ways that that strength showed up was my son was at a small college, and the president of the college wrote a letter. And it was a very heartfelt letter about how she was just very sad that the students couldn't be there and they were thinking of the students. And it was just a very well-written letter. And so I just sent an email to her and said, thank you. This was an amazing letter. I'm sure this must be an incredibly hard time for you. And I just appreciate, your authenticity in the letter. And thank you. And she immediately emailed me back and said, I am in tears because I am getting so many emails that aren't of this genre. So it feels really nice to get something that recognizes. And I also said, I'm sure that you have worked hard your whole life in order to be in this position. And thank you for your leadership. So it was a way, and I didn't think about it until much later, a few weeks later, to say, oh, that was an appreciation of beauty and excellence. It was appreciating someone having done something. And we emailed back and forth a couple of times during that period, because it was just really, again, that language, because of the strengths, I had a language in order to be able to express that to someone versus just saying, hey, thanks, nice letter. It really gave me a little bit more of a language. All right, so identify maybe one of these. Write it down on your paper. One or two that you might want to explore and what that might look like. All right, so let's pop back to Alice. So one of the issues in positive psychology that comes up a lot, and since we work in the corporate environment, people want quick fixes. And we'll get the request of, can you tell us how to manage stress? This is a very popular request. And we'll do a program where we talk about taking stress and using the energy of stress and turning it into resilience, just like you build a muscle. Stop this for a second. We talk about whole being practices, and the word practice is whenever we take the time to do small things on a regular basis to build the strength of our minds and build the strength of our bodies. And so the thing that I love about this idea of whole being versus just wellness is that when we're doing these long, deep breaths, when we're actually taking a moment to pause, when we're actually practicing something like meditation, we are actually changing our physiology. And in changing the physiology, we're changing our mindset. There's a fantastic book called The Upside of Stress, Kelly McGonigal. She talks about how you think about stress has the biggest impact on how stress physiologically impacts you. And a simple example of that is, right now, a lot of people are tired, and so we're having a lot of coffee. Coffee is a stimulant to our nervous system, and when our nervous system is stimulated, whether it's stimulated from coffee or from a real situation or from worry, it puts us in a mindset where we're on alert all of the time. If we track that back, why are we drinking coffee? And I'm tracking back on my own journey. I was drinking coffee because I wasn't getting enough sleep. And in not getting enough sleep, I was also affecting my physiology, which was affecting my mindset. So it's really interesting because in the world of corporate wellness, we've also gone through this phase where initially when we started the business 12 years ago, people wanted to do physical exercises. And then we went through a phase where people said, oh, we want to focus on mental. And then now, because everybody's been at home, we talk about physical again. Everybody's saying we're not moving. The best news is that they all are affecting the other. What you're doing for the physical is greatly affecting the mental. But the real key, and I think this is really where we fall off, it's not the hero thing that we have to do every single day. If we are practicing something and stretching, 4% is what the research says. If we're stretching and practicing 4% every single day, we're building the muscle of remembering when we get to those hard places, I do have tools. The first tool might be just call my friend and she'll remind me of my tools, right? A lot of times that is the first thing on the compass, is reaching out and getting support where we need it. And then remembering like, oh yeah, no, I do know how to, oh yeah, I can do that, or I can use that. And as we build those skills, when it's not a rainy, hard day, when we bump into those rainy, hard days, we have built that muscle. It's just like a physical muscle. So that word practice, and we call them whole being practices because they are habits of awareness for mind and body. And a lot of times the word habit has a bit of a bad connotation. So it's interesting. Let's go back to Alice's story. So in the first Alice in Wonderland, there's a conversation about these 6 impossible things. And the queen actually says, so Alice, the conversation is going somewhere and Alice laughs and says, there's no use trying. One can't believe impossible things. And the queen says, I dare say you haven't much practiced. When I was your age, I did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. So this was in the first original version. Now, in the new 2010 version, the movie starts with Alice's father, and he's an explorer. So he's mapping, and his friends say to him, Charles, you've finally lost all of your senses. They say, this venture is impossible. And he says, for some gentlemen, but the only way to achieve the impossible is to believe it is possible. Alice is a little girl at this point in the story. That's sort of the very beginning of the story. So Alice is back in Wonderland. The Red Queen is wreaking havoc. Everyone realizes that the person who is going to slay the Jabberwocky, which is the big dragon, is going to be Alice. They give her a little bit of time because she doesn't realize that she's going to be the person to slay the Jabberwocky. They finally get there. She's in her suit of armor. She has her sword. And she says to the Mad Hatter, "But this is impossible." And he says, "Only if you believe it is." And that's when she remembers her father.
Six impossible things. Count them, Alice. 1. There's a potion that can make you shrink. 2. And a cake that can make you grow. 3. Animals can talk. 4. Alice. Cats can disappear. 5. There's a place called Wonderland. 6. I can slay the Jabberwocky.
Now, I didn't notice the first few times that I watched the movie how perfect this was to finish out sort of my connection with that. But when Alice gets to that really hard point, she pulls all of those. She says, "There's a potion that can make you shrink." And then she does the next element. When she gets to that next moment where she's got that fear creeping back in, she says, "And a cake can make you grow." And then she keeps going and she says, "Animals can talk." And she's describing all of the impossible things that she's already now seen happen. Cats can disappear. There's a place called Wonderland, and I can slay the Jabberwocky. So this idea that not only are our strengths the compass, but that within that compass, it's almost like, I was thinking the other day, it's like nesting dolls. Within the compass, there's another strength. And then from that strength, there is another strength. And so this idea that when we are learning about them, and when we're learning about them in those moments that are not those stressful moments, and we're building those positive emotions, and we're sharing those stories. One of the things that happened early in COVID, my children and I were sitting there and we were having a dinner, and their dad said, "This is really hard." And he said, "But as a family, we've been through a lot of hard things, even before you guys were around." And we actually shared some stories with them of things that had happened before they were born that they didn't know about. And so as we come all the way back around to this idea of stories, we've got the stories of our heroes and heroines, and I'm always looking for a great story. Joseph Cornell was the one who really wrote about the hero's journey. There's a new book out that's actually called The Heroine with 1,001 Faces. This is a book by Maria Tartar, and she really looks at all the women, all the way, Persephone, all the way to Nancy Drew, and says that sometimes the heroine and the way that she achieves the victory, slightly different than the approach of the hero. So it's a great book to check out. But as we sort of keep seeking these stories, and for me, the big thing is that I couldn't have recited my story. I could see characteristics in another character, and then I could aspire to that character, and then I could find a mirror to sort of see those in myself. But if I had just tried to write my own story, I definitely would not have been able to do that. But then on the other side, as we tell our daily stories, and over the last, since March of 2020, the hero and heroine's journey has been being able often to just have another day, to just keep persevering, to just continue to have hope, continue to keep the flame going, And I really was committed with my own children that one of the most important things that I felt as a parent was, and we kept saying, resilience is the key, is the core curriculum for this year. And resilience means to keep finding ways that we can see a positive, hopeful future. Even if we can't find the exact path, and just keep honing our tools and our compass for us to keep moving on our journey. So I'm totally open to questions, comments. If anybody wants to share any insight that they had or their own journey or their own story.
I think it would be really fun for us to put in the chat what were some of the favorite stories. For me, we had a question which was like, you mean from childhood or from adulthood? And I went right to Where the Wild Things Are, which I knew as a kid. And then, of course, who was my favorite character was Max, and what did I like about him? And it was zest, bravery, perseverance, even his leadership. He was in charge. He was the king. And I thought, where does that reside in how I've responded to the pandemic with my team? And it was really fun. How about for anyone else? Let's put in the chat some of your books that you chose and your stories and your characters, because I think it will elevate us all to hear, and maybe some of us will get some good books to read, Let's see, Huckleberry Finn, says Vic. Awesome. Yeah, that's a great one. And I'm reading a book now that's an old book. It's
Little
by
Women.
Rumer Godin. Little Women, awesome. That Joanne gave to me, an episode of Sparrows. You can even see it's like, one of those wonderful. I'd love to go to the classics too. The Bible with the Peace of Jesus. Beautiful, Amy. Scout, To Kill a Mockingbird, Mary Pat. Wow, not just books. A heroine I picked, Deanna, the Huntress. Oh, yes, for her bravery. Yes. Strength and beauty. Again, Scout from To Kill a Mockingbird, the Book of Ruth. Beautiful. And for you, Alice, I know Alice in Wonderland is, but I bet you have some other stories that you pull from as well.
I always felt like I was a combination of, and there's actually a picture that I found, it was of Dorothy and Alice, because I also, The Wizard of Oz very much resonated with me. And if you think about The Wizard of Oz, all of the characters are looking for a strength that they felt that they were lacking, and that whole particular journey, and then the recognition of that they were always already within you.
And Deirdre said, that's so true. I hadn't thought of that. It's really true. Now I think about a book, no matter how many times I read to children and adults, makes me cry. The Emery Pit by Demi. The Empty Pot. The Empty Pot. Oh, The Empty Pot. Okay, got it. Yes. Yeah, by Pierre, I don't know how you say that. Gujrat? Sheila, you might have to unmute to help me say that. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Farron. Indiana Jones, strengths, courage, creativity, curiosity, and humor. The Alchemist, beautiful, because no matter how many things he tried, nothing worked. It's like the Book of Job, right? Oh, goodness. Yeah. And we've got The Little Prince. Yes, Nancy. Oh, wow. And how about, it's funny, out in the movie theaters right now, I don't know if anybody's had a chance to see it yet, is the story of Jacques Cousteau. And my understanding from one of our Zoom Unity people, Lenny Sachs, is that she says she really thinks that it might win the Oscar. So
Wow.
If you're in for a treat, that is Harriet Tubman, yes, and the Emperor has true vision in The Little Prince and knows he's honest. It's beautiful. So this idea of, do you feel like we go on a hero or heroine's journey every day?
Well, what's interesting when you really start to look at that is they talk about, there's something happening on an ordinary day. Well, there's an ordinary day, and then there's some disruption. And then there either has to be an acceptance or a refusal. Am I going to take this challenge? Am I going to act, or am I going to back off? Hero's journey is where they say yes. And I think I can certainly relate to, there have been times where I'm like, no, nope, not hearing the knock, not today. And then other times where we say, okay, I can step in. And then there's a mentor or other resources, but then there's also some form of a death. There's some either idea or vision or mindset, not an actual physical death, but there's some moment where something is shed, and that we emerge into a new way of thinking, being, skill set, something. And so once we have acquired that new piece, it's like a new step, and then we continue. And then what I love about the hero's journey is that it's not just about continuing, I've got that new skill. It's where I move into that, almost like with life. There's a point where you move into that point where you're like, what is my legacy? How will I share this? How will I empower the next person when they get to that moment? There's a great movie, Tiffany Schlein, I think her name is. We'll put that in there. And she talks about, it's so easy right now to get overwhelmed with all of the challenges. And yet the world changes because of people. And the world changes because people have the courage to step in and say yes at that moment. And they step in and say yes at that moment because people around them have recognized the strength. And so when we're wringing our hands thinking, and I certainly have days like that, like, what can I do? The whole world is when I'm recognizing my own skills and strengths, when I'm spotting them in my team, when we're building each other, that gives us that strength that when that knock comes on the door for the thing that really matters, that we can say yes and step into it. So I do think it could happen several times a day. Have you had that?
I was just thinking about the hero's journey. I was thinking about Viktor Frankl's in between stimulus and response. There was a pause and an opportunity to choose. So I was thinking about that. And I was also thinking about, some of us are in this phase of what I would call crisis management, where it's like, the dike has like many leaks and we're plugging them, and it can feel that way. And then to take a step back and to think about whole being wellness and to actually plan it in versus it having to be yet another thing to do on the to-do list. Do you know what I mean? I think we're kind of in that place right now. I know I am. Anybody else out there? Like, I don't want to add a 30-day challenge to my to-do list. But if I go into the spiritual, the reason why I'm doing it, right? Instead of it being another thing to do, it actually becomes the foundation for supporting a wellness. So I wish you could talk about that a little bit. I mean, what I'm talking, I guess, about is the soil upon which the building is built.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When the building feels like it feels like we're doing both things. We're building the building and we're tending the soil, right? In this time period. Anybody else feel like that? In other words, things are falling apart and yet there's opportunities to grow. And so it feels like I have to work on the foundation, which is the positive psychology tools, right? What are my habits? What are my practice self-regulation to make sure that I'm looking for the good, what are the 3 things that I'm hopeful and looking forward to today? What is the one thing that really went well today? What is the strengths that I'm seeing? That's for me, like tilling the soil. And then I feel like I'm, like making sure the windows are shut so that when it's raining, everything doesn't get wet.
Right.
So I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit.
Well, so there's still a perception that certain kinds of habits are a luxury. And so, especially in the corporate world, we see leaders as hard driving, working all the time, and often modeling a lifestyle that is not sustainable. It's interesting that within the legal profession, they now have a whole entire campaign and law firms are signing their names to it to address the high levels of addiction within the legal profession, all aspects of it. And so we're starting to recognize that. However, we're still having a hard time often with people recognizing that as a leader, I am modeling for my team when I say I'm not sending any more emails after 6 p.m. I'm modeling for my team whenever I say we're going to create a schedule and we're going to timeline out our projects to where people can have weekends. I'm going to say, no, I'm leaving because I'm going to my CrossFit class. And so when leaders start recognizing that, just like parents, that they are modeling, those good behaviors, and there are leaders who are already doing this. The other thing that we really have to, transition into, and I think we are starting to, because you're right, Caroline. I mean, there was a point for me that it was almost like my life turned inside out, and the practices were the most important thing in order for me able to do the calling and the work that I want to do. Companies are now realizing that if you are not taking care of your people and creating an environment that supports their mental and physical well-being, your organization has a timeline. And what I'm seeing that I just think is so wonderful, and it's a little like we work in corporate environment, and we get hired by the companies, but my goal is to empower people so that they can make the decisions. Is this the right place for me? This is not the right place for me. A lot of people are saying they're not going back to work. The companies are saying, everybody, you're going back to work. And they're like, why would I want to spend 2 hours commuting and have to think about what I'm going to wear whenever I've been able to work from home? And a lot of companies are saying, you're right. You know what? You can have a more balanced life. And they're really putting that more as a priority and as a leadership skill to be helping them with these kinds of practices and these mindsets versus just it's a wellness program. Here, go learn mindfulness on the side so that you can manage the stress that we have created by having a toxic work environment.
Right. And I want to talk about a little bit about what Megan McDonough, who of course is the CEO of Whole Being Institute, talks about, which is if you want to be a leader, you have to be a leader in your own life of your own self. So it's that internal environment. So what are your commitments? What is your schedule? What is your relationship to your own self-leadership? And what is, Alice, do you find that to be true as well? And an important component of what we're talking about?
Well, and I think that as we start to learn our strengths and as we get more honest with ourselves, my tendency will always be to try to fit 10 things in a space that can actually fit 3. And so for me, and I think for many of us, it's the recognition that we can do 3 things really well. And then we're going to have to either start delegating, we're going to have to take the time to build our team. But the reality is a human body and a human mind is never going to be able to expand at the rate of technology and this illusion that we're going to possibly be able to keep up. And so as leaders, to be able to say, no, we are still human bodies with human minds. And this is what we can or can't get done, and being okay with that. Not having these unrealistic expectations of a machine that can only do so much.
Back to the whole being idea, right, of being human. We have some things in the chat, some other things, books that people have said, Profiles in Courage, The Power of One, a young boy with the help of a kind stranger becomes a symbol of hope during World War II, Transformation, Childhood, The Little Engine That Could by Waddy Piper, I think I can, then I do it. Helen Keller, Anne Frank, Isn't That Always the Case? Childhood, The Giving Tree, definitely the power of the pause and then saying yes or no can take us on a daily hero's journey, says Nancy. We aren't being distracted from these, essentials as much now, right? Deirdre shared. And then Amy said, building our lives on that sure foundation versus on shifting sand. Beautiful. Lois said, everything is different now. People no longer are willing to be bulldozed at work. I got a new job and what was expected in 20 hours was insane. I got very sick and quit. Good for you, Lois. It's great to have you back on the calls. I'm sorry you went through that experience, but again, that's like a journey in and of itself, trying something new. And here's a great question. When was the last time you did something for the very first time? Alice, when was the last time you did something for the very first time? I'll ask myself that too. I have to think about what have I done that I haven't done before, because the brain loves things that are new, loves things that are novel, right?
Yeah.
And we can even add things. It could be, oh, I know what I did. I made soup. I made soup. And, you know, I usually do it in the Instant Pot, but I actually like did it on the stove where I had to soak the beans and do all that kind of stuff. It sounds like a simple thing, but I really wasn't sure exactly how to make that work, you know? And so that was the first time I had done that. And I haven't tasted it yet.
Oh, the mystery, huh?
I'll have it for lunch and I'll let you guys know next week.
Yes, exactly. You know,
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing as we wrap up here is that I struggle because as an architect, I was responsible. When you're an architect, you're responsible for everything, and you've got to plan, and you've got to like budget, and you've got to do all those things. And I think what all the practices of positive psychology help me with is just developing a deeper level of trust, and trust that you can do a certain amount of planning, and then you just have to be a good observer, because life will take its turns, and being curious about what's the next turn and what can I learn from this versus having the illusion and idea that I will always and can be in control. That I think was one of the biggest takeaways for me, is that we can still do a little of both. And it's that yin and yang of which one do I need to be doing today? Do I need to just be watching and floating a little bit and reading the tea leaves? Or do I need to be taking a little bit more action and planning and dreaming?
I think that's an important thing when you were talking about like the controller or the bulldozer, or even in parenting, right? That desire to fix it, to make it all work. And I would talk a little bit about that mystery, right? There's even that in the medical profession where, you know, you go to somebody and you say, you know, this is what I'm feeling. And then they say, well, it could be this, or this, or this, but there's some logic and there's some mystery in everything. And it's not so, you know, simple, you know? So can you talk a little bit about that? Because Alice certainly, that's part of her journey, right?
Well, that tendency for all of us, we say around here, don't let someone else's anxiety become your urgency.
Oh, speak more about that.
So the idea that every single thing is so incredibly urgent and that we really need to have a solution or get back to people immediately because we've got this access of technology that it's happening all the time. When we don't leave space for the mystery, we're not leaving space for the magic. Because the hard places, the darker places, the unknown places, and I learned this as a designer. You know, when you're a designer, you look at the site and you look at the materials and you look at what the program is and what the people want. And then you've got this phase that is just total chaos. And you have to be able to, and that happened when I was writing this chapter, you know, there's a point where you have to be able to let all these pieces and parts have gravity work on them. And then if you're being a good observer, you will start to notice that there's some pattern and they are doing some kind of alignment that is not something that you're controlling, and that it starts to sort of, you know, make its way.
Beautiful. Reminds me of the rubric of the power of relationship, the power of three. You, the other thing, and then the relationship that's in between. And there's a bit of mystery. So, you know, whatever it is, whether it's a building or a book or another person, and then you have you. And then there's the magic that's in between, the space that's in between that needs its own life and has its own needs and wants and stuff like that. So very evocative conversation.
And that the idea
just
that, you know, every time I've had a dream and I've had a little snippet of a dream and I've kind of let it expand, it always ends up being better than what I had imagined. When I try to control it and dictate it and have milestones and track it, it tends to fall off the track.
Yep, just like my soup. I followed the recipe, but then we didn't have a lot of those ingredients. So I put all kinds of things in there. I'm looking forward to tasting it.
There
after
you
this call. Thank you so much, Alice, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's always a delight to spend time with you. Next week, of course, we are back on Tuesday and Thursday at noon. This is, of course, the month of November. For me, it is the month of gratitude. Gratitude gives us energy, which is one of the reasons I practice it. I'm certainly grateful, Alice, for you for showing us a completely different way of looking at strengths today. It was just delightful.
Oh,
Everyone,
thank you.
take care. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you guys being here, and follow your hero and heroine's journey.
Beautiful. I'm going to take us off spotlights. If anybody would like to unmute and say thank you to our guest, please do so. And we will see you next week.
Thanks. Kudos.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Bye-bye.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Really enjoyable
Thank
talk.
you, Alice.
Yeah, it's
You're
really good.
welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.